this video is a suggestion from somebody. And at first I was like, I'm not doing that because I don't want to tell people what they think. This is a channel about my opinions, and I don't get to tell anybody else what their opinions are. But the more I thought about it, the more I think that there is an actual legitimate, argument to be made. So here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you don't know what you want. I'm not saying that you are lying to yourself or others about your preferences. So if anything that I say in this video doesn't apply to you, then it doesn't apply to you. But I do think it applies to some people, and I think it's kind of a lot of people. I think people don't like 5th edition D&D as much as they think they do. I think they actually want to play other games, and they just don't know it. Now, that sounds like a really condescending opinion, and that's a big part of why I didn't want to do this video. But there are two avenues by which I think that this can be made reasonable. First, there's a lot of people, maybe more than half the player base. I'm not sure. I haven't done a study, but it feels like a significant portion of the 5th edition D&D player base that has never played any other games, any other RPGs, I should say. They've never played any other RPGs. That's their only experience with RPGs. And so they're going to assume a couple of things, and I know this because I also assumed these things back when I had only played D&D 3rd edition. You're going to assume that other RPGs are more or less the same thing, maybe with different trappings, that they are the same complexity, and that they're going to serve the same purposes, and they're going to be formatted basically the same way, and they're going to be more or less about the same stuff. You're going to think it's like other games are just D&D with different curtains, just in a different setting. It's D&D in space, so why not just play D&D in space? It couldn't be further from the truth, but that is a thing that is a natural assumption when your only experience with a genre is one single work. And the other thing is, sorry, sticking with this for a moment. So they don't realize that they literally don't have enough information to realize that what they're trying to make D&D do is going to work a lot better in other systems. And so I see this all the time on Reddit and a few other places where people are saying, I'm trying to do this thing in my D&D game. It's not working. My player wants to do this. How do I make that work? And so many times it really comes down to dude, you/your player or whatever, you want to play this other game. This other game does exactly what you're asking for. D&D doesn't. So there's that. And there's also the aspect that a lot of 5th edition D&D tables, and this is especially true in 5th edition, I would say it is almost not at all true in 4th, and it is true to a lesser extent in 3rd. Not nearly all. I would say a majority. A majority of 5th edition D&D tables are heavily homebrewed. You've got layers upon layers of house rules, additional classes, custom items, and I'm not just talking about additional content. I'm talking about core fundamental changes to the rule set. We're using this, and this optional rule. We're not using these rules that are standard. Special rules for you can't multi-class from this class specifically because it's considered a problem, I guess. I rule these spells to work in these other ways, which is not how they're written, but that's how we're going to do it. And I'm not saying that any of these are necessarily unreasonable. Sure. House rules are a significant tool. They're a perfectly legitimate tool for customizing a game experience. But what ends up happening is that you have so many of them, oftentimes, that it could be argued you're not really playing the game anymore. You're not playing that game. You kind of have twisted it and evolved it into a separate game, and it's kind of a Ship of Theseus situation. Like, how many rules do you have to change before it's a different game? There isn't a correct answer to this. And so I would hesitate to actually say you're not playing 5th edition anymore if you change a rule. That's clearly not correct. But I think the volume, the degree to which people mod their game suggests that the game baseline is not really what they're looking for. And when they say, oh, I love 5th edition, what they're actually saying is, I love this conglomeration of extra, of like modifications to 5th edition, and that the actual game itself, not that great, would not serve me, would not be interested. The number of, because like, I could, if I was so inclined, modify 5th edition to the point where I think I could make it a good game. If I wanted to put hundreds of hours into it, I'm pretty sure that I could turn it into a game that I enjoy. I'm just not willing to put in that much work because there's plenty of other games out there that I could enjoy instead. Why go to all the effort? That's kind of my approach. But some people do go to all the effort. Some people do put in dozens or hundreds of hours homebrewing and house ruling and modifying and rewriting entire sections of the rules. I've seen people who have done this. And then they go and say, oh yeah, I love 5th edition. I'm running my my homebrew campaign. Every time I see a homebrew campaign, I get suspicious. They go and say that, they attribute their enjoyment of the system to 5th edition when they're using probably less than half the rules as written. So both of those two things, modding the game to an extreme extent and then also playing the game without knowing what the alternatives are, both of those can lead me to the conclusion that people don't actually like 5th edition that much. Why is it so popular? That's an entirely different thing. I think I've gone over this before when I talked about the reasons to play 5th edition. That was one of my very early videos. But basically, like, it is the 5th edition is just the edition that was current when D&D got really big and famous in pop culture. There's a lot of factors that went into that. The rise of Critical Role, big mentions on a popular Netflix series, Stranger Things. These kinds of things happen, and then people get interested in D&D. And then you also have like the people who played back in like the 70s and the 80s who are now getting older. They have kids, they have grandkids, and they're like, oh, I have this nostalgia trip that I'm going on. I want to go check out what D&D is doing now. And 5th edition happens to be the current edition when that happens. And so I think it is, frankly, a hilarious accident that 5th edition is as popular as it is. It has nothing to do with the game itself. But the result of this, and people, I've had someone say that one of the good things about 5th edition is that it is a gateway for getting people into tabletop gaming. And sure, I think it's a pretty bad gateway, to be honest. Having a gateway at all, good. Having the gateway be that specifically, I don't know that I could consider that a good thing. Because there's a lot of things that 5th edition does that puts people into bad habits. And this is not necessarily all new to 5th edition. I think D&D in general is a very specific style of RPG. And the fact that people regard it as a generic fantasy RPG and sort of apply the lessons learned from playing it and designing it and running it to other RPGs can be problematic. I can spot someone who's only played D&D a mile away when they join one of my games when I'm running other systems, because they will approach problems in a very specific way that is, like, it's not unique to D&D, but it is emblematic of the way that D&D approaches things. D&D and related systems like Pathfinder and such. So it's not great as a gateway. And people who get familiar with it quickly find that they want to change it, They find a lot of things that they don't like about it, and they start changing it. Oh, I just need to house rule this. I just need to house rule this. I don't like the way that feels. I'm going to house rule this. That's a problem. I need to house rule that to make it not a problem anymore. These kinds of things happen a dozen times, 100 times, however much it happens, and eventually what you end up with is something that is not fundamentally the same product that you started with. Or you go exploring other RPGs, and you find that a lot of the problems with D&D and 5th edition specifically just don't exist outside of that family of games. And that other games do these genres a lot better. There's a lot of this is far from the first time I've said this. There's a lot of truly remarkable tabletop RPGs out there, and I would encourage everyone to go explore and check them out. Find a community online that is about exploring new RPGs. Get some recommendations. I think you'll not be disappointed because there's a lot out there. And if you are one of the people that I've described, that you've only ever played 5th edition D&D, or you are spending a lot of time, you have like a 8 to 10 page house rule document of like all the things that you've changed, the spells that have been nerfed or buffed, or new classes or changes to existing classes, or all of that. If you're either of those two categories of people, or maybe you're both, that could happen. I would really implore you to think about whether or not it is actually 5th edition that you like. And I would suggest that it's probably not. The issue is that a lot of people who want to discuss D&D and where I see this happening, and I want to make the suggestion like, oh, actually you want to play this other game, those almost exclusively happen in D&D communities, D&D subreddits, D&D Facebook groups, D&D Discord servers, whatever it may be. And naysaying D&D is not always looked well upon in that. If I pop into a Reddit server, or a subreddit, and I say, you are actually describing this other game that is not D&D, you should check that out instead. More than half the time, that comment gets downvoted because I'm in a D&D subreddit, and you're not supposed to naysay D&D, and that's kind of how communities are. So I would say get into a community that isn't D&D focused and ask for recommendations from them, not from a D&D community. Because sometimes you'll find people who are well versed in a lot of different RPGs in a D&D community, because D&D is one of them. But you're also going to get a lot of people in that environment who are predisposed toward only recommending D&D or not exploring other possibilities. There's a lot of closed-mindedness in the D&D community. It's a thing that is and always has been. So anyways, my thesis statement, if you will, is you might not like 5th edition as much as you think you do.